The first snow had fallen heavier than anyone in town expected. By evening, the streets of Willow Creek lay buried beneath a thick white hush, broken only by the sound of boots crunching through ice. That was when Emily staggered into town, her thin coat clutched tightly around her frame, her face red and raw from the biting wind. She had no luggage, no family waiting, and no plan except survival. Breathe had carried her through too many storms in life, but pride couldn't warm frozen fingers or fill an empty stomach. She had once been someone else entirely, a daughter in a proud family that had long since fallen apart, a young woman who dreamed of city lights and better days. But dreams had slipped away, replaced by the cold, hard truth of betrayal and loss. Tonight, standing at the edge of the old saloon with nothing left but her stubborn will, Emily realized she had no choice. She had to trade her pride for shelter, even if it meant asking help from strangers who might turn her away. The townsfolk of Willow Creek were kind enough, but cautious. A girl alone in the winter stirred whispers. Some avoided her, others stared too long. Yet one man noticed her not with suspicion but with something she couldn't name. He sat alone at a corner table of the saloon, his broad shoulders stooped as if carrying an invisible burden, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing most of his face. When he finally looked up, she saw the scars, deep, twisted marks running along the left side of his cheek, half hidden by a beard. It was not frightening, but there was a quiet sorrow in his gaze, as though he'd known too much loss to ever mock another's pain. "A storm's only getting worse," he said simply, his voice low and steady when she passed near. "You got someplace to stay?" Emily hesitated. Breathing clawed at her throat, begging her to lie. But the truth pressed harder. She shook her head. The man nodded slowly, as if they expected that. "Name is Luke Callahan. Ebe got a ranch not far from here. It's quiet, and it's warm. You're welcome to come along." Her first instinct was fear. She didn't know him. A scarred rancher, offering shelter, it sounded like the beginning of a story that never ended well. And yet, something in his voice held no demand, no threat. Used kindness. A kindness she had long ago stopped believing existed. "Still," Emily whispered, "why?" Luke studied her, his gaze unreadable. "Because winter's cruel. And no one ought to face it alone." That night, Emily rode with Luke through the storm, the world nothing but white snow and dark sky. His ranch sat at the edge of the valley, a sprawling but weathered house with a barn that moaned against the wind. Inside, warmth greeted her like an embrace. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with a golden glow. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. Luke didn't ask questions. He didn't pry into why she was alone or what had driven her into the storm. Instead, he set a bowl of stew in front of her and sat across the table in silence. The only sounds were the fire popping and the storm raging outside. It was in that silence Emily felt something unfamiliar, safety. Over the next days, as the storm worsened, Emily found herself caught in the quiet rhythm of Luke's world. It rose before dawn, tending to the horses and cattle despite the bitter cold. His scars, she noticed, were not only on his face but etched into the way he moved, cautious, deliberate, as though life had taught him to guard each step. And yet, he carried himself with a gentleness that surprised her. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Emily began to help where she could, mending clothes by the fire, feeding chickens, even learning to saddle a horse under his patient instruction. With each task, she felt pieces of herself returning. She was no longer just the girl who had fled the city with broken pride. She was someone useful, someone needed. But one evening, curiosity overcame her. "Your scars?" she asked softly, her eyes flicking to his face before she quickly looked away. "How did it happen?" For a long moment, Luke didn't answer. She feared she had gone too far. But then he set down his coffee mug and leaned back. "Fire," he said finally. "Took my parents' house when I was 20. He made it out, they didn't they?" Emily's breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say to ease that kind of loss? Luke seemed to sense her struggle. "I spent a long time thinking the scars on my face were the worst of it. Truth is, the real scars are here." He tapped his chest. "And they don't fade." Emily lowered her gaze, tears stinging her eyes. "I know a little about scars that don't fade. Luke looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she didn't feel judged. She felt seen. As winter dragged on, their bond deepened, not with sudden declarations, but with small acts of trust. Luke left the ranch ledger open on the table, letting her glimpse the debts he was struggling with. Emily shared fragments of her past, a love that had promised forever but left her with nothing but shame and shattered pride, a family that closed its doors when she begged for help. One night, when the snow outside piled against the windows like a wall, Emily broke down. "I traded everything I was just to survive," she whispered. "My pride, my dignity, gone. I'm nothing now." Luke stood from his chair and crossed the room with slow steps. He didn't touch her, not yet. He simply said, "Don't you see? You're still standing. That means you're stronger than you know. Breathe is a heavy thing to carry in a storm. Sometimes letting it go is the bravest thing a person can do." Emily wept then, and this time when Luke laid a steady hand on her shoulder, she didn't flinch. By spring, the valley bloomed again. The ranch that had once felt like a place of exile now felt like a promise. Emily had found more than shelter, she had found purpose. Together, she and Luke repaired fences, planted a new garden, and breathed life back into the home. The townsfolk, once wary, began to smile when they saw her riding alongside Luke, her head held higher than it had in years. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily stood on the porch watching the horizon burn with orange and gold. Luke joined her, silent as always, until she turned and asked the question that had long lingered in her heart. "Why did you take me in that night?" "Really?" Luke's scarred face softened. He hesitated, then answered with quiet conviction. "Because I saw someone worth saving. And maybe," he paused, his voice catching. "Maybe I hoped you'd help me remember I was worth saving too." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She reached for his hand, rough and scarred like his face, and held it tight. In that moment, she realized the truth she had never dared to dream. That love could grow from brokenness, that two scarred souls could build something whole together. The story of Emily and Luke spread quietly through Willow Creek. Not because they boasted or sought attention, but because people saw the change in them. The scarred rancher who once lived in solitude now laughed more freely. The girl who came to town with nothing now carried herself with grace and hope. They had given each other more than shelter, more than companionship. They had given each other love, the kind forged in fire and storm, the kind that heals wounds pride could never hide. And so the lesson lingered, not just for them but for anyone willing to see it, that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in holding on to pride, but in letting it go long enough to accept the gift of another's kindness. Because love, real love, isn't about what you've lost. It's about what you're brave enough to begin again.